the day before, the couple days before, Trump had a call with Putin.
A Ukrainian hand and a Russian hand shaking hands over a deal, a negotiated death for Ukraine. They want to somehow have control over Ukraine's future direction. To stop the war with occupation is not peace for the people who are occupied. When Trump just talks, he says peace, and he just means stopping the guns firing. Zelensky says that the security guarantees document is ready to be signed. Russia then becomes unwilling to sign this deal.
Russia wants to destroy Ukraine. It doesn't want strong security guarantees for Ukraine, which will work. Вітаю.
Вітаю.
Today we continue to talk about peace negotiations between Ukraine, USA and Russia. But today we are going to talk about such aspect as paradoxes of these peace negotiations, and to see if these paradoxes, if these contradictions impact on the progress of these peace negotiations. But in the beginning, I propose you to look at picture which artist Katya Aquarelna prepared for Billi-Villi media. And this is very interesting picture, illustration to our topic. Isaac, what do you see here?
Well, yeah, I think we can see potentially one day the image that we'll see of a Ukrainian hand and a Russian hand shaking hands over a deal. But of course, we see that the Russian hand on this side is not completely a hand; it's a snake. I think one thing I really like is it's a sketch. It's not a clear image, kind of like how the negotiation process is. It's not completely clear how we'll get there. It's just an idea of it. What do you see, and maybe do you have any ideas for a title for this image?
Yeah, and I also, yes, we see this snake, finger snake, and it's about dangerous of these negotiations with Russia. And it's interesting that black color, which is a symbol of war, and blue color is a symbol of peace. And can we find a compromise between war and peace? It's very interesting and very, very good question. Trying to find this compromise. This is very dangerous. About that one hand is used for not for deal but for bite. And about your question about the name, I can propose several names. Maybe one of them, for example, deal with the devil. Mm-hmm. Then peace or bite, and devil wears a black suit, maybe, and poison negotiations, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
Do you have ideas of a name?
I have a pun that maybe works in English. Let's snake on it. It's not so serious for this image, I think. Maybe a negotiated death for Ukraine is more serious.
Okay, and with this question, can be a compromise between war and peace. Let's start our discussion about paradoxes. Do you see some paradoxes in these peace negotiations between Ukraine, USA and Russia?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few that exist below the surface. So I think often the way that the negotiation process is described by negotiators in the media is that it's all about territory. And the only one issue left is what happens to Donbass, or really just Donetsk, the rest of Donetsk Oblast that Russia hasn't occupied yet. But beneath this, I think there are lots of issues that are stopping progress. The main one, the most fundamental one, I think, is a kind of a peace deal that creates a Schrödinger's Ukraine, a Ukraine that is both politically independent and politically subjugated to Russia. So for me, Russia's goal since Ukraine's independence, really, and certainly we've seen it since 2014, is to have control over Ukraine's politics, its internal affairs and its external affairs. Internally about language, about religion, externally about NATO, maybe EU membership, Ukraine's so-called neutrality. And at the same time, of course, for Ukraine, this is unacceptable. This is existential. Ukraine wants to be a sovereign country with its own decisions on these issues. And I think that's basically the fundamental point of this war, and that Russia began in 2014 and escalated in 2022. And something that really can't be resolved easily in negotiations. So I think if we look at the negotiation process, we see it regularly since 2022. Initially, Russia tried to install its own government in Kyiv with the assault on Kyiv. And then in the Istanbul talks, it tried to impose neutrality in Ukraine's constitution. More recently, I think we see this real push for elections that Russia can then influence and try to replace Zelensky with somebody more favorable. They want to somehow have control over Ukraine's future direction. And this has become existential for Russia as an empire who wants to continue this control over its colonies, essentially. And it's existential for Ukraine as an independent country who wants to escape this. And I think this is a fundamental contradiction that is very difficult for the peace process to solve, even more than territory, for example, where we can see some sort of movements towards a compromise with a demilitarized zone, maybe with a referendum. I think that it's the fundamental problem of why Russia began this war, why it escalated this war, and why it won't sign a deal that doesn't achieve this.
I completely agree with you that it's a fundamental paradox. The purpose of Ukraine is to become a peace, independence, sovereignty country. The purpose of Russia is to destroy Ukraine and to make Ukrainians to call themselves Russians. How do you imagine we can find compromise here? Or, for example, just imagine Russia says, okay, we agree destroy not all Ukraine, but only half of Ukraine with half of Kyiv, and we will satisfied with it. And Ukraine has to agree with it also. No, it sounds very strange. And another example of compromise between these two purposes, which exclude one another. For example, okay, Russia is agreed to destroy Ukraine not now, but in 2, 5, 10, 20, 15, 100 years, and Ukraine has to agree with it. So it also sounds very strange and even crazy. Yes, how we can find a compromise between such purposes which exclude each other? it's a really fundamental problem. And in my opinion, we have to work with purposes. So, ideal option is to change Russian purposes. But how we can change Russian purposes? We can't do it. Russia can change its own purposes. Maybe under pressure of some environmental changes or something else, or internal processes. And in this situation, I think we can't talk about peace deal in the meaning of peace as a stable state. For years, centuries, where Russia refuses from this purpose to destroy Ukraine, to make Ukrainians to call themselves Russians. Here we can talk about ceasefire, just ceasefire. We have to call things by their own names, yes. Without changing the purpose of Russia, we can't talk about peace. We can talk only about ceasefire. How we can do it? How we can make Russia to reject from its maximalized demandings, yes? Just to rising price of war for Russia, till the level when Russia can't fight.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The only things is either changing the regime within Russia or making it impossible for Russia to continue. And I think even more than the regime, it's the ideology. It's how central this idea of Russia as an empire is to its own identity. And I think that's why it becomes existential, because if Ukraine escapes from this empire, essentially, and something that's so, Ukraine is so central to the Russian idea of its empire, not some peripheral territory in Central Asia even, or, Ukraine, they called it Little Russians, right? And I think that's why the threshold for Russia stopping has become so high. It's become so central to its own identity that this victory, not for some completely destroyed land in Donbass, it's for this image of itself, its own identity. But I think this paradox as well, it really begins to question the purpose of these negotiations in general and what peace means. Because if you try to mediate between life and death, and you say, we'll find a compromise and it will be, I don't know, permanent disability or in a coma, perhaps. Is that peace? It's not peace. It's not peace. To stop the war with occupation is not peace for the people who are occupied. And I think that this is often missed when Trump just talks. He says peace, and he just means stopping the guns firing. But peace for Ukrainians, even for Russians too, is not this. It's a transformation of the situation, and I think that's why it's so fundamental here, and it relates to all of these other paradoxes as well. So Russia has this big ambition, and this is central, and I think it appears in a very technical part of the negotiations over security guarantees, and also to a lesser extent over reconstruction for Ukraine. Because if we accept that Russia's purpose really is some form of political control over Ukraine, the main way that it achieves this, one of its main tools has been military force since 2014, since 2022. And Ukraine's response to this, its way of achieving independence, is through security guarantees. Its own security guarantees, its strong army and so on, but security guarantees from Europe and from America. And so Ukraine in these negotiations really needs strong and clear security guarantees. It needs all the details to be agreed upon what happens when Russia violates ceasefire, a peace deal, within 24 hours, within 48 hours, how much response is there, how many forces, how many troops from Europe, from partners, what will they specifically respond to, and so on. So Ukraine really needs this to be detailed. Russia, the more detailed these become, the more scared Russia becomes of agreeing to a peace deal. It only would like weak and vague security guarantees for Ukraine in the context of Budapest Memorandum that we've spoken about before. It wants security guarantees that it can break, that don't restrict Russia from in the future attacking Ukraine again to enforce its control. So there's this paradox in negotiations where the closer we seem to get to a deal, Zelensky says that the security guarantees document is ready to be signed. Russia then becomes unwilling to sign this deal, because as soon as Ukraine is happy with it, as soon as all the details have been worked out, Russia sees that it's losing this chance to gain control over Ukraine. And because of that, I think Russia intensifies its war, either to gain control militarily, or perhaps to make it so costly for the West to give security guarantees because they fear what Russia will do. They fear these threats of nuclear attacks, of, bigger attacks. And so they think, well, we can't put troops into Ukraine, for example, because we see how violent, how aggressive Russia is. So in a paradoxical way, the closer we get to agreeing a peace deal, the further we get, because Russia sees this deal as a reason to continue fighting rather than as a reason to make a deal.
Yeah, I agree, because if we take into account that Russia's purpose regarding Ukraine is to destroy Ukrainian identity, it means that Russia is not interested in this peace deal where, for example, point 3, Ukraine will receive strong security guarantees. Russia wants to destroy Ukraine. It doesn't want strong security guarantees for Ukraine, which will work. Point 7, it's President Zelensky mentioned this point it seems to me in November of 2025. Ukraine will become a European Union member in particular a determined time. Russia doesn't interested in European Union integration of Ukraine. And point 8, Ukraine will receive strong package of global development. So it means all these points they are also confirmed by these documents. Yes, security guarantees from USA, and also there are discussions about security guarantees from European countries, NATO countries, but now we talk about security guarantees from USA. And it is confirmed also by document prosperity plan for Ukraine. Yes, Russia doesn't interested in prosperity of Ukraine, development of Ukraine, and in security guarantees for Ukraine. That's why, of course, Russia will find obstacles for progress of this deal, and Russia is not interested in this deal, which provide independent future for Ukraine, where there will not obstacles for development.
And crucially, this prosperity plan, these security guarantees, only happen after Russia signs the deal. So they can prevent it as long as they continue fighting. As soon as they stop fighting, Ukraine basically escapes from their control with strong security guarantees. I think also recently we saw Budanov, now head of the office of the president, said that Russia had accepted American guarantees, not European ones. He didn't mention about European ones, but implied. And these American guarantees are much more vague than European ones and also limited by time. So initially it was reported, I think, about a 10-year limit. Then Zelensky said it was 15 years. But regardless, this allows Russia to basically say, Ukraine will escape our control for 15 years and we will attack again and it will come back within our control. This isn't about Donbass and territory. This is about a future attack, future control, within the context of Russian imperialism over centuries. You only need this option for a future attack if you intend to maintain this as a means of control. And that's why unlimited security guarantees are another thing that Russia won't accept, I think.
Yes, the same is about European Union integration of Ukraine. Also, Russia says that they're not against the European Union integration of Ukraine, but in fact they realized that European Union integration will make this gap between Ukraine and Russia more and more, and possibilities, options of Russia to impact on Ukraine will decrease. That's why they can say that they're not against, but in fact they're not happy with it. Yeah. What else? What kind of paradoxes do you see in these negotiations?
So there's a similar one here about sanctions. So of course the Western strategy has been to impose economic sanctions on Russia increasingly to limit its wartime economy, especially the sale of oil and gas, but also purchasing technology that can be used in weapons and so on. And this is economic pressure to make the war much more expensive for Russia to fight, and so that it eventually realizes that it's unable to continue, or it just becomes unable and there's an economic crisis, for example. But at the same time, Russia's demand in negotiations is that these sanctions are lifted after signing a deal, so that the economy can recover. And in fact, they've gone further now and are talking about trade deals with America. There's this Dmitriev plan, so-called, for lots of investment in each country and so on. And essentially, this demonstrates to Russia that the sanctions actually aren't, they're actually not effective, they're not pressure. Because whenever Russia feels like it's close to an economic collapse, it simply signs a deal and the sanctions disappear, investment appears, and the Russian regime does not face this threat. So it's very difficult to work with sanctions as part of this deal, essentially, because you need this pressure, and also you need to offer sanctions relief to Russia, because the sanctions are tied to the aggression. If the aggression goes away, eventually the sanctions should go away. And so and Russia has no reason to stop fighting if you don't offer this. So there's this kind of paradox where it's necessary to put the pressure on with sanctions, it's necessary to offer relief, but in doing both of these things together, Russia just continues to fight because it knows that when it stops fighting, everything will be okay. I think the logical way to resolve this is to have some sort of phased plan for relieving sanctions. So after a certain period of time, or after certain criteria are fulfilled, these sanctions will be lifted in response. The problem with this is that Trump is so keen to make money that Russia doesn't see this, as a threat anymore. They see this opportunity. As soon as the war stops, Trump's talking about, all these investments in Russia. all these ways to make money. So he doesn't want sanctions to complicate this process. So in theory, it's a solvable paradox. But in reality, I think Trump's position really undermines that, and just gives Russia this possibility to continue fighting, and when they feel threatened by sanctions, to say, okay, we'll sign this deal.
Yeah, look, Russia feels profitable from this situation where America is mediator of these negotiations, yes? The Washington says, oh, like, okay, we are mediator, so in this position we can't impose new sanctions against Russia, and also we will not help Ukraine with a weapon. They are considering strengthening sanctions against Russia, but at the last moment they reject from this idea. Last year also, you remember this visit of Zelensky to Washington, where Zelensky is supposed to receive tomahawks from Trump, but received a refusal. And later we know that the day before, the couple days before, Trump had a call with Putin, and as this call impacted his decision to reject tomahawks. So for Russia, a lot of pluses, a lot of profitable from these negotiations when America doesn't strengthen sanctions, when America doesn't against Russia and doesn't strengthen support of Ukraine. And Russia can stay in this negotiation for a long time and uses this profit.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of this is it's so profitable, like you say. It's profitable also for elites within Russia. So the sanctions are meant to put pressure on these elites. Personal sanctions to stop them traveling, economic sanctions, especially on anyone related to the war industry. But I think they too see that there's this essentially a reset button that they can press, signing the deal and ending sanctions. And so that also means that the elites who care about the economy for their business, maybe they're not so ideological as Putin, they're more economically driven, but they also see that this is a reason for them not to put pressure on Putin to end the war, because they know that the economy will survive. And so altogether, I think that partly explains why sanctions aren't so effective in forcing this deal, because this is the whole logic of sanctions, is to pressure them, to pressure Russia to force a deal. But I think 4 years in now, we see the strain on the economy, but we don't see the result that was hoped for. One other aspect to this is it relies on, the paradox relies on Putin getting accurate information, or believing that he's getting accurate information about the economy, so that when he thinks that the economy is close to collapsing, then he can sign the deal and get sanctions relief. I'm not sure that that's actually true. I think that people within the Russian central bank and so on will be very afraid to tell Putin the real situation inside the economy. But at the same time, I think Putin believes that they will, and so he believes that this option remains, this option to reset. So it's it becomes a kind of information problem as well, about how much Putin and the Russian regime understands the Russian economy, and also how much Ukraine and the West understand the Russian economy. Because it would be stupid, really, for Ukraine to sign a deal the day before the Russian economy collapses, to sign a deal making compromises on Ukraine's sovereignty, making compromises on the size of Ukraine's army and so on. So it's really, the whole paradox becomes about information and who understands the situation the best. I think that everybody believes that they understand the situation the best, which is why this paradox applies. But it's maybe not as clear as it initially appears.
Yes, and but look, these negotiations, we don't talk about Russian collapse, Russian economy collapse, military collapse, something else. There is pressure on Ukraine. That Ukraine, there is a demand of Russia that Ukraine has to give Russia some territories of Donbass, which Russia couldn't occupy it for not only 4 years of full-scale war, but for 12 years of war against Ukraine. And if Ukraine, in this logic of these negotiations, if Ukraine gives Russia these territories, so Russia can agree with this peace deal, or as we talked before, it is better to say that ceasefire, yes, not peace, but ceasefire. It's also a trap of these negotiations, I think, because look, we talked before, yes, about that this is existential war. It's not territorial conflict where we should find a compromise on territories, as it was between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Yes, there was a territorial conflict, and nor Azerbaijan nor Armenia wouldn't desire destroying of completely destroying of other part. Yes, they both were ready to recognize territorial integrity if their territorial demands would satisfy. But here is not territorial war, territorial conflict, and this is territorial demandings of Russia. It's a trap, and this with this demanding, Russia pretend that it wishes peace, and that problem is in territory, but in such a way, Russia just only uses these negotiations as leverage of its hybrid war against Ukraine, and try to achieve through political instruments, leverages, through diplomatical leverages, those which it couldn't receive on the battlefield. I guess that there are principal fundamental contradictions which we mentioned before above, and other details. There are just reasons not to execute this deal, but at the same time to keep this negotiations track and to receive profits from it.
Yes, I think Russia has become quite comfortable in this situation, like you said, where they can put pressure on America to stop support for Ukraine. They can maybe seek also to divide Europe and America, even Europe and Ukraine somehow. They see opportunities in these negotiations, but they don't really see the same opportunities in a peace deal right now, in a ceasefire.
Yes, remember how it was during this Minsk negotiations, when Russia tried to make Ukraine execute all conditions, and only then marionettes of Kremlin maybe would become to implement their part of conditions. But the first Ukraine had to do everything, political, security conditions, and only then Russia. So if there is this principle fundamental contradiction, all these details, they can't be implemented. They will not work. They will use just for pressure, for achieving other tasks, implementing other tasks. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think this next paradox is another kind of fundamental one that can't really be solved through the process or through Western, even Western involvement. And then there's two more that, like you say, is really about the process, about how Russia uses these technical details to gain advantages. So this other really fundamental paradox I see, I think maybe you'll agree, is a peace agreement, a ceasefire, whatever it ends up to be, will bring more violence to Russia. It won't bring peace. It may be peace somehow to Ukraine in some form, but for Russia, its whole economy, its whole society has become mobilized for war. And this takes place through, massive contracts for Russian soldiers who receive far more money than they could ever dream of in any any peaceful Russia. And the millions of people in the Russian army, the hundreds of thousands more who died or injured, perhaps millions too. This will cause a combined massive loss for Russia when they have to accept the cost of this war. Right now, people's support is essentially bought through payments for soldiers, also payments for people working in the military industries. And that's it's kind of a massive redistribution of wealth throughout Russia to the poorer regions through these employment contracts, through these Shahed drone factories, munitions factories, and so on. And when the war ends, there won't be the money or really the purpose to have so many people in the army, to have so many people employed in building bombs and drones to attack Ukraine. And so you'll get, firstly, massive unemployment because all of the civilian industries have really shrunk to give money for the military industries. So the civilian industries can't absorb these people, these unemployed people. And at the same time, there'll be a lot of anger, I think, about why so many people have died, why so many people have got life-changing injuries. And this is something that Putin is really afraid of. I think we know this through, firstly, how controlled Russian society has become. Recently, we've seen news about banning Telegram, even banning Facebook, banning YouTube, and so on. Really ways to control the population and stop these protests that he fears so much. At the same time, he's scared to announce a new mobilization of soldiers, even if it's necessary, because, well, firstly, regions are running out of money to pay for new soldiers, signing on bonuses and so on. And they're running out of people who are willing to sign up even for huge figures. And at the same time, so we've seen, recently news about Ukraine inflicting more casualties than Russia manages to recruit over the past couple of months. And at the same time, if Russia wants to continue its offensives, they need more people because Russian offensive gains have kind of slowed down over these past couple of months as well. So Putin is very scared to announce a mobilization because of this social pressure as well. There's also quite a clear parallel to the First World War. So the Soviet kind of withdrawal from the First World War led to huge violence within Russia, the Civil War. Withdrawing from Afghanistan too played some role in the collapse of the Soviet Union. So when Russia withdraws from wars without success, it often leads to regime change and huge violence inside Russia. And Putin he's very aware of this history. He likes to talk about history so much. And I think he's comfortable in this situation with the war, and he's very afraid of what will come when he ends the war. I think particularly to do with veterans, so he's launched this this program called Vremya Geroyem, about a time of heroes, about bringing soldiers into politics, but only very carefully selected ones who he knows will be loyal. So he's hoping to co-opt this demographic before they can lead to protests, essentially. So I think it's very clear that Putin is afraid of this prospect, and it's another reason why continuing the war is easier than ending the war for him. Whereas Ukraine, very different scenario. I think you can talk far more than me on this, but Ukraine has much clearer reasons for why it's fighting, for why people are dying. And I think Ukraine's not afraid of peace. Ukraine hopes for peace so much, hopes for this to end. Zelensky too. So you get these very different positions. But yeah, there's this essential paradox that for Russia, a peace deal, a ceasefire, actually brings the threat of lots more violence, of lots more instability, especially for the regime.
I agree, yes, for regime, because for Putin, on this stage of war, where price for Russia is very high, but achievements are not so big, and on the stage of war, for this regime is more profitable to continue war, but it is profitable only for regime, not for Russia. And also I suppose that economy affects on decision to continue war or not. But economy is not determined element here, because Russia has strategic aims, and it tries economy works on these strategic aims, not strategic aims work on economy. And if their aims, their purposes change, they can rebuild economy also. So strategic aims are determined, and then economy.
Yeah, so the previous paradoxes have really been reasons why Russia is not so interested in a peace deal in the end. It doesn't want peace because of various reasons that we've discussed. These next two paradoxes are about, even if we could solve these ones, even if Russia did have some genuine interest, there are still real problems in getting there, technical problems in negotiations. So ceasefires, I think, are the best way to get to a deal because they give space for negotiations to happen without the risk of events ruining the process. So, for example, I mean, the best example of this is in early at the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022. The Istanbul talks might have failed for other reasons, but they really failed because of the revelations of Irpin and Bucha. And it became impossible for Zelensky to be involved, or for any Ukrainian government official to be involved in negotiations with the Russians when we were seeing all these images of the atrocities committed at Irpin and Bucha, and in other deoccupied territories too. And then again, when I think last year when we were talking about, when Trump got into office and there were serious negotiations about serious hope for some sort of quick deal, there was the strike on maternity hospital. Trump says, every time we think Putin is serious about peace, he attacks someone again, he launches another strike. All of these processes on the battlefield can easily ruin what's agreed or the progress in the negotiation room. So ceasefires are really a great way to stop this and negotiate seriously. But the problem, of course, is that neither side, but especially Russia, will accept a ceasefire because from Ukraine's perspective, experiences with Minsk I, Minsk II, and the kind of whole Minsk format have shown that Russia violates ceasefires. It uses them as tools of propaganda to rearm and to equip its forces better and so on. And for Russia, I think there's the same fear that Ukraine could use a ceasefire quite well to rotate its soldiers from the front line that are obviously really demanding and needing rotation, to train more as well, because Ukraine's army really relies on training much more than the Russian one does. And so these fears about how the other side could manipulate a ceasefire to their own advantage in order to continue the war means that neither side is really enthusiastic about a ceasefire. We've seen Zelensky agree to one. He agreed in March 2025 to a 30-day ceasefire. He's recently spoken again about a ceasefire in exchange for giving aid to countries in the Gulf who are being attacked by Iran. So a ceasefire is certainly something I think that Ukraine would accept, but it's not the central part of negotiations for this reason too, because Russia will also use it to continue the war. So this fundamental lack of trust from this whole history of negotiations and from understanding each other's intentions, not to negotiate because of these fundamental paradoxes, means that even if there was a hope for some sort of deal to be possible, there's just this technical problem that is very difficult to overcome, I think. I mean, you know much more about this history of ceasefires. Do you think it's a justified fear for Ukraine?
We know that there is no trust to Russia, and in current negotiations there are arguments regarding 2 points. The first one is about territories. Russia wants to receive all territories of Donbass, and the second point is about Zaporizhzhia nuclear station, who will govern the station, manage the station in the future. And it looks like price of Ukraine for ceasefire, not even for peace, but for ceasefire. And Russia realized that it is a very disputed question for Ukraine. On the one hand, price of people's life is higher than territories, but on the other hand, thousands of Ukrainians died protecting Ukraine, and they were fighting on these territories, and it's a question not about just constitution restrictions. It's a big moral question, and but the biggest problem that Ukraine doesn't believe Russia, that if Ukraine gives Russia these territories, that will receive ceasefire for a long period, for years, for example. Yes, maybe not peace completely, but ceasefire. And we had this experience when Russia violated its commitments, and that's why we don't have trust. And with this demanding, Russia tries to move Ukrainian red lines and to look how far it can move it. But Ukraine tried to keep this red line on the spot, because army keep front line, and we have to keep these red lines in negotiations. Look how interesting. Everybody knows that this peace plan, the first edition of this peace plan, was written in Moscow. And the idea of this first edition was to restrict Ukraine to protect itself in future. But now this Ukrainian approach, when we managed to add some documents as security guarantees, yes, as prosperity plan. Ukraine, with this approach, Ukraine stopped play this Russian game and began its own game, where now Russia has more questions to this document than Ukraine.
And I think that leads really well into this last paradox, especially discussing this kind of period towards the end of 2025, when we had this 28-point plan written in Moscow, like you said, and then this kind of counter proposal from Ukraine and also from Europe. And this really demonstrated that in order to get to a deal, compromise is necessary from both sides. If we even forget about all of these fundamental paradoxes and we assume that both sides want a deal, both sides need to compromise. But the problem is that, especially when Ukraine compromises, Russia sees this as weakness. And when Russia sees weakness, it intensifies its attacks. So last December, Zelensky began to make a few compromises. For example, accepting some limit on the size of Ukraine's armed forces. I think initially it was proposed to be 600,000. It was negotiated to 800,000. But this is a it's a compromise. It's a concession from Ukraine. Similarly, a time limit on America's guarantees, whether that time limit is 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it's a compromise. Holding elections within 100 days of a deal, because this seems to be an American and a Russian demand. So Ukraine began to make these small compromises, and Russia didn't reciprocate. Russia instead took these, said thank you very much, and intensified its attacks on the front lines, and intensified its attacks especially on energy infrastructure in civilian cities, because it saw weakness. And it's kind of true about this weakness, because at this time Zelensky had problems with the corruption scandal domestically, and then America began to put more pressure on Ukraine because of that. They saw weakness and began to put pressure on Zelensky to compromise too. And so Russia hardened its position and tried to get more concessions from Ukraine. And this is the way that Russia negotiates. It has a very maximalist beginning, and if it sees strength, perhaps it will make some compromises and meet in some reasonable place. And if it sees weakness, it will maintain this maximalist goal. And as soon as Ukraine offers a compromise which is necessary to get a deal, Russia sees weakness and intensifies. And so there's this sort of paradox. At the same time, Zelensky knows that he can't appear weak because of his domestic position. If it looks like he's betraying Ukraine's interests, he knows that he could be replaced or face protests and so on. He also knows that he can't look weak to partners, because America especially, but also Europe to some extent, would quite happily end this war, I think, if Zelensky and Ukraine were ready to. So as soon as they see that Ukraine doesn't have this will to fight more, they might stop giving so much support, so much military and economic aid. So there's lots of reasons why Ukraine and Zelensky cannot appear weak in these negotiations and compromise. But because of this, there's no progress towards a deal that requires compromise. And I think we see similar things on the Russian side. For their own reasons, they don't want to compromise. But again, there's a sort of sense that Putin's position relies on some degree of success. At the moment, he's framing that success as capturing all of Donbass. But if he compromises on this, perhaps he feels that his own position could be threatened too. So, yeah, neither side is really willing to compromise. And when the other side does compromise, then it only gives a reason to push further, to fight more. And because of that, peace never gets closer. You know, the logic of negotiations pushes peace further away. And I wonder if, we might see this more and more now that we've kind of navigated through these other paradoxes in some form, and we're talking about technical details, and there's pressure to reach a final deal before the summer or before whenever. This problem about compromises, I think, is very clear.
Look, these negotiations would be impossible without America. USA managed to sit at the negotiation table Russia and Ukraine, and on this stage of war, these negotiations without America would be impossible. And America found mechanism how to sit at the negotiation table, Russia and Ukraine. And I want to back to this war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, where America also was a mediator. And in those conflicts, America found possibilities how satisfied and to create a balance between interests all of parties, where Azerbaijan received access to its enclave in Armenia. Armenia saved its territorial integrity, and America provided guarantees for both for 100 years. Yes, right. And here in Ukraine, here in this Russian-Ukraine war, what America can propose Russia to satisfy its interest to reach this peace deal, or at least ceasefire?
I think it comes back to this fundamental first paradox that we discussed. America cannot give Ukraine sovereignty to Russia. It's not within America's power, and I think that's why Trump gets so frustrated, because he says to Zelensky, you know, you're obstructing peace and so on, and this is what he means. It's that you're not willing to meet Putin's demands, and there's no way that America can force this realistically. America offers its own incentives to Russia. It offers money, ending sanctions and investment and so on. But like we said, this is not something that Putin is so interested in. It would be nice, but it's not fundamental and existential and central to identity in the way that this imperialist war is. And I think that's why America's really struggling, because it can't solve the fundamental paradox of achieving a Ukraine that is both politically independent and also politically controlled by Moscow. There's no way to solve this paradox. And yeah, it feels to me like that's the struggle that they're having. I think there's an additional struggle that America has, which is that Witkoff especially doesn't understand this situation, and he talks about territory only. And he talks like he worked in real estate business before, and because of that, he sees things very materially. But I think that explains for me why America's been trying for over a year now and really not achieved much success at all.
Yeah, and how do you think, in your opinion, how long America will be ready to maintain these negotiations without efficient result?
It's a really difficult question, and maybe someone will watch this podcast in 3 months and laugh, but I feel like we're reaching a point where that's quite possible. We've had signals recently from Russia that they might be open to ending this negotiation process if the territorial aspect isn't resolved. And now, as we discussed, there's this huge war in the Middle East that's really distracted America's attention, and I suspect will continue to distract America's attention for quite a while. And so, well, firstly, logistically, it's very difficult for Witkoff and Kushner to negotiate with Iran and with Hamas in Gaza and also with Ukraine. And so, since the focus is on the Middle East, perhaps that's where they will spend most of their time, most of their efforts. And so I think we might reach a point geopolitically where it's just the kind of negotiations just disappear from the agenda. And actually, I think today, perhaps even we saw news that the next scheduled trilateral talks between Ukraine, Russia, and America are going to be postponed or not held as planned. So we're kind of seeing this process beginning already. The other important timeline, I think, here is the midterm elections in America. So Trump repeatedly talks about wanting this issue resolved before then. He's talking about the summer and July the 4th and so on. And he wants it solved before then, firstly because it will potentially give him a boost in the elections, but also because he recognizes that if he loses these elections, he loses control of the House of Representatives and maybe also even the Senate. He becomes much less powerful to force things. He will have less leverage over Putin and over Ukraine too. And at that point, a peace deal becomes harder as well. And then one final timeline to consider here is the attrition. So this is a war of attrition, and both sides believe that continuing to fight will eventually lead the other to collapse first. And the negotiations might get overtaken by this attrition. We talked about economic collapse potentially, but also perhaps a military collapse because of recruitment, because of munitions or equipment somehow. There's lots of things that that could lead to a collapse before these negotiations make any progress. And so I think I could see negotiations becoming a lot less serious within the next few months for any of these reasons.
We know that Trump wants a quick victory. And Trump has already realized that in these negotiations can't be a quick victory, but maybe he still hopes that victory is possible, and that's why he still hold on with these negotiations. But if he decides that it is not profitable for him, for America, they can leave these negotiations and say that responsibility on both sides, on Russia and Ukraine, And I tried, but that's all. Or if, for example, Trump decides that they can achieve ceasefire, but the price is higher than interest of America. And in this case, they can also leave these negotiations. So we'll see how it will develop, and how this war in the Middle East will impact on it. It's a negative way, I think, but it's another big question for another talking. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching us. Keep following us on this YouTube channel, Billi-Villi. We will talk here about important events which impact on the situation in the world, in Europe and in Ukraine.